Cheide.
Hello fantasy gamers, Matthew here from Grey Army Gaming in lovely Lund, Sweden. Today, for this episode of A Few Simple Steps, we will be showing you how to make simple and stylish styrofoam stones. We'll be doing some dry brushing techniques and showing you how to make different layers of paint to give you a realistic stone effect. To lead off this video, I would like to just show you a brief glimpse into what we will be making. We're going to be making a stone door gate piece made out of styrofoam, and we'll have a big large door on the front. It will be a black and gray with white highlight styrofoam piece. On the other side we have put a door frame with a iron gate. So essentially the idea will be that this will be the outside and the attackers will be coming here, and this will be on the inside for the defenders. So this is the piece that we will be making. Let's show you this few simple steps to how you do this. To begin here, we can just show you the supplies you will need when we get started. What I would like to start with is some styrofoam blocks. I just simply glue these together. We'll fill them in with filler later. Those will be important. And of course, your PVA white glue to help glue your stuff together. We're going to need some spackling, some filler, in order to make the cracks, fill in the cracks and give that rocky feel. And then what we'll do when we go and start our painting is we'll start with the darkest colors first, the black, and we'll move into our grays, do some dry brushing with grays and some white to finish it off for some nice highlights. And of course, it'll be helpful to have some different paint brushes. We'll use a big thick paintbrush to put on most of our paint. And last but not least, in getting your supplies ready, it will be helpful to have an X-Acto knife. We're going to use a candle here to do some of the burning and melting of the styrofoam. So there you go, let's get started. Here is the door piece that I have already constructed, and what I will be doing is actually gluing this onto the styrofoam blocks here. So what I would like to do is just begin by simply tracing out this rough shape here on this side and the opposite side. So there we go. If we take this away, now we have a general outline that we can use now when we begin our cutting and our melting. For our cutting now, let's just take out our X-Acto knife, put it out as far as it can go, and just start to shave off the edges as we begin to cut. Let's get going. Alright, when you have this about where you want it, with the angles that you have on there, we just want to get a little bit of angling. Then let's flip it over and continue on the other side with our other outline. When you've now got it approximately around the outline here, you'll notice we still have a lot left on top here, so use the rest of your knife here to come and just shape the rest of this in a nice fashion so it's approximately something like this that follows the outline. Get rid of these big blocks. So let's do that right now. And finally, before we go and do some of the melting, use your knife and just make some big cuts and rough it up a little bit so it's not so uniform. Of course, this will get melted a bit as we go, and we will also be using some spackling to make it rougher. But just go ahead and make some cuts here and roughen it up a little bit. When you're satisfied with the general shape of your stone, in this case something pretty round and tall, what you can do now is take your candle, and what we'll be doing is melting the styrofoam around the edges to get away some of those bubbles and those dips. I would recommend you open a window for this, get some fresh air, ventilation, and don't inhale the fumes as you go. Some of you may want to use a blowtorch if that goes quicker, but I find the candle does the job pretty well. So let's show you how this looks. Basically, just hold the candle and just bring your styrofoam right up to it. It doesn't have to be there long, just long enough to melt the styrofoam and to give it a nice melted effect. So the melting has happened up here. I will continue on and finish this entire rock face and show you how it looks when I'm finished. And now, after the melting and burning process, this is how it will start to look. As you can see, there's some black and some brown, some scorching from the candle. That is totally fine. We will cover that up as we go. What we're going to do now is take some spackling and fill in some of these cracks and add a little spackling overall just to take away a few of the bumpy holes that are still left over here and make it even more like a rock face. So let's start to do that now. So here we go. Let's take a little bit of our spackling. Once again, put it on our finger here and find the cracks, the areas you want to fill in, and just start spreading it and rubbing it in. I went ahead and covered the entire stone with a thin, small layer of spackling to try and give it even more fine definition. So let's let this dry a bit and glue on our front piece onto the front of the stone. So the idea now is simply to glue this front door piece onto this rock face like so, and we will use some regular old white PVA glue and let it dry. Alright, we've now finished attaching the front of this stone to the rest of the stone that we were creating. And I've gone ahead now and just added a bunch of spackling to help make the transition between those two pieces look a little bit better. And I went ahead and covered the rest of the stone with lots of spackling, which will give it a little finer texture now when we do the dry brushing. In addition, I went and just made a little frame here out of popsicle sticks and a little bit of a gate here, which we will be putting on the back side after we paint this all up. So we'll be gluing that on later, but the next step now is to simply cover this all in a base coat of black. So let's get to that right now. Since we will be doing some dry brushing later and some fine touch up with the paint, there's no really need to be too careful here. So we can just slop on the black paint and get a nice good base coat covering. So let's go ahead and do that now. And with that completed now, we can just let that dry before we begin our different shades of dry brushing. Here we have now the base coated rock, and I'll just turn it around to let you see what it looks like. Basically, the whole thing is just covered in a nice coat of black. Don't worry if it doesn't cover everything, because we are going to go over with grays and a little bit of white. So if there's some white speckling here, that is totally fine. That will blend in very nicely. The next step now that we're going to do is I'm going to add 4 different layers of dry brushing here. Excuse me, 3 different layers of dry brushing. We'll start with a blackish gray, and then we'll move to a gray, and then we'll finish up with a little bit of white highlights. Remember, when you're dry brushing on here, you always want to move from the darkest color to the lightest, and that will give it its nice 3D effect. So let's start out with some dry brushing on the black and gray. Alright, let's put a little bit of black paint down here. We don't need a ton of paint because dry brushing requires very small amounts of paint because we're just basically going to be going over with a nice fine layer of paint. So let's start with our grays and our blacks, and we'll just do a little bit of mixing here, a little bit of blending. Not too much black because we don't want to make it too dark, but just enough to make it a little bit lighter than the first layer of black that we put on. So let's dry brush it here, brush it off with our brush. And once we do that, let's get started. Really light brush strokes to start with, and we will just go across the entire stone. And if you take a look now, you can see how the grays are starting to pop out a little bit from the blacks. That's exactly what we want. The recesses should be darkest and the outer parts should be getting grayer and lighter. So let's continue on, and we will just do the same process here now by adding gray, and then I will show you what it looks like when we add some white highlights. So a little more gray added to there, and let's once again brush off most of the paint. We just want to have a little bit left on the paintbrush so we don't come on too strong. And then let's just begin to add those gray highlights. And a little close-up shot now to see how it's starting to look even better with some more grays on it. You can compare it to the black that we have here, and you can see how that is nicely blending together. This front piece that we put on here is also blending in nicely. So now we can add our white highlights, our accents. That'll be our last step on the dry brushing. A little bit of white. Once again, remember you don't need much paint to make this work. So let's take our white, do our same technique. Spread it out nice and evenly on the brush, paint it off, and then you can begin to do your white accents. Very lightly, not much force, just rub the brush across and just kind of kiss the top of that rock and the pieces sticking out. And with our white highlights added now, you can see how it has nicely blended into the rest of the piece. And it has a very nice stone look with dark crevices and popping white accents on the furthest out points. All right, what we'll do now is we will just turn this around and do our final step. We will paint this brown and dry brush some yellow on there and add our gate here to finish off our terrain piece. So if we paint the door frame, we just need a little bit of brown and not much, just enough so that we can cover the black that we've already put on there. So let's just add a nice, simple layer of brown. And once that brown is now dry, we can go ahead and add a little bit of dry brushing yellow to it to give it that look of old aged wood. Once again, for dry brushing, you need very small amounts of paint, so a little drop is probably going to be good enough for the small amount of area we're going to cover here. So once again, just take your paintbrush, get it nice and dry, and then go ahead and just simply begin to dry brush it on. So there you go. It gives it a nice look and effect of old aged wood. For the last step now, we will be attaching our grate that we made and we dry brushed already to look like weathered iron. We will just be gluing that down here into the area that we have pre-measured. So let's take some white glue and add it back and spread it out, and we'll just stick that down and let it dry. All right, let's give that a few minutes to dry. Here is the piece in its final form in play. What we'll do is we'll probably have other stones and rocks here to make sure that this can be a wall and actually a gate that serves the purpose of holding out troops. So there you go. We will be calling this the Door of 1,000 Tears. Look for it in play in Legendary Battles number 12. Well, there you have it. A few simple steps for making styrofoam stones. Thank you for joining us here at Grey Army Gaming, where Grey can always play.